Good evening. We'll try to pick up the pace a little bit tonight in our study of Genesis. We're still in chapter 12, but we want to try to get through chapter 14 tonight. If we can pull that off, I think we'll be making some of the progress we were trying to make last week. I do want to take a moment and pause. And we mentioned last week, Abraham was a great man, obviously. Perhaps one of the greatest, if not the greatest human beings ever to live on this planet. And yet, he was like the rest of us. He had his faults, he had his weaknesses, had his moments, if you will. And certainly that's borne out here, even in chapter 12. And we'll see some more about Abraham in just a moment. But the promise was made to Abraham here in chapter 12 that he was going to have a nation of people to come from him, that there would be many people, as innumerable as the sand on the seashore and as the stars in the heavens. And so he's going to have a lot of children. Today, the children of Abraham continue to be the source of great confusion in the minds of many theologically. Also the source of political turmoil and upheaval and we might say intrigue at times. You know, there are a lot of people in our country today that believe, for example, we should be allied with Israel, that is physical Israel today, because they are the children of Abraham, and God made this promise to Abraham, and God promised that those who bless the children of Abraham will be blessed, those who curse the children of Abraham will be cursed. And so John Hagee and others like him remind us frequently that we are to bless the children of Abraham. And so it's clear to me that there is a great deal of confusion about what is meant by being a child of Abraham. And I want to explore that with you just for a moment before we get into our study again, or resume our study again in chapter 12. And I want to ask simply, who are the children of Abraham? In the time of Jesus, this is a question that John the Baptist and Jesus himself addressed head on. And it's kind of interesting to see what view they had of this question, because many of the Jews in the time of John the Baptist and in the time of Jesus believed that they were legitimate children of Abraham because they were Jews. That's right. And so because they were Jews, they said, well, we're children of Abraham. In Matthew chapter 3, verse 5, the Bible records that Jerusalem and all Judea and all the region round the Jordan went out to John and were baptized by him in the Jordan, confessing their sins. But when he saw many of the Pharisees and Sadducees coming to his baptism, he said to them, brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the wrath to come? Therefore, bear fruits worthy of repentance, and do not think to say to yourselves, we have Abraham as our father, for I say to you that God is able to raise up children to Abraham from these stones. So he was telling these Jews in his time, it's not enough to say we are physical descendants of Abraham to make the claim, I am a child of Abraham. Jesus said the same thing essentially in John chapter 8:39. They answered and said to him, Abraham is our father. And Jesus said to them, if you were Abraham's children, you would do the works of Abraham. But now you seek to kill me, a man who has told you the truth, which I heard from God. Abraham did not do this. So they said, they made the claim, we're the children of Abraham. And in Jesus' response, it was clear from what he said, he didn't consider them children of Abraham. They might have been Jews. They might have had that same genealogical, or should I say DNA, perhaps running in their physical bodies. But according to Jesus, that was not what made them a child of Abraham. What did Jesus say from this response? What can you conclude about being a child of Abraham, just off the top of your head, from what Jesus said?
Faith.
Faith, okay. He's speaking here about works, though, in John chapter 8, verse 39. And what works were they trying to do? These Jews. What works were they trying to do?
Stop Jesus.
Stop him how?
Kill him.
They're trying to kill him, weren't they? And what did Jesus say about Abraham? He wouldn't do that. And since Abraham wouldn't do that, you cannot rightfully make the claim that you are a child of Abraham. That's right. He went on to explain, you're children of Satan. And you're murderers and you're liars, and he's your father. And so it's more to do with our behavior, our faith, and our works that reflect more on whether or not we are a son or daughter of Abraham. In Galatians 3:26, Paul said, "For you're all sons of God through faith in Christ Jesus. For as many of you as were baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you're all one in Christ Jesus. And if you are Christ, then are you Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise." So whether you're a Jew or a Gentile, slave or free, male or female, you are a son or daughter of Abraham. How? In Christ Jesus. And so through faith, when we obey the gospel, we're baptized into Christ. We are in that sense, and beginning at that moment in our lives, as long as we continue to walk according to faith, we are the sons and daughters of Abraham. Does this mean then that as a nation of people we should not be allied with Israel in the Middle East? That is a whole different question. I just think it's important that we keep ourselves theologically on track with what it means to be a son or daughter of Abraham. We may have some geopolitical concerns and reasons to be allied with Israel today, but I do not whatsoever endorse any of the millennial views of the Zionist view, I should say, of the Jewish people, and that they are somehow God's chosen people. Now, God did choose Israel, and God still chooses Israel, and God still blesses Israel. And I believe that God will curse those who curse Israel. But we want to explore what that means a little more, perhaps when we get into to chapter 15. But just wanted to kind of clear that air for everyone in our class tonight. Who is a son or daughter of Abraham? So verse 10 through the end of the chapter 12, we read it last week. We won't reread it. But when Abraham went into Egypt and sojourned there for a while, he told his wife Sarah before they got there to say to the people of Egypt that you are my sister. Was that true? They had the same father. They did not have the same mother. And so they were half brother and sister. So you could argue that it was true. But the reason he said to say you are my sister and not my wife is because if you tell them you're my wife, you're so beautiful, so pretty, they'll just kill me and take you and put you into Pharaoh's harem. And that would be terrible. We don't want that to happen. I don't want to die, and I don't want you to be in Pharaoh's harem. So let's just tell him you're my sister. Question: is that a lie?
Yes.
It is a lie, isn't it? What is a lie? Define a lie to me. Anybody? What's that? Something that isn't true. Misleads or deceives or intended to make you believe something that isn't the case. It was clearly a lie. So was this a lie that Abraham told at the spur of the moment when he was caught red-handed with his hand in the cookie jar? Or did he think about this in advance and decide, when we get there, we're going to lie about this, me and you, and we conspire together to lie? Did they lie? Is it right to lie? So why did the Bible not condemn Abraham for lying? Does it?
He was kicked out of Egypt for it.
He was, indeed. He suffered for it.
Well, you said once the Bible itself might expressly say that
He sinned. Yeah. Interesting, isn't it? You know of any other instances where someone did something you know was wrong, and yet the Bible did not condemn it, or there was no pronouncement from God specifically or explicitly stating that it was a sin. Of course it was sinful. Of course it was wrong. Of course it was a falsehood. It was a lie. And Abraham made this lie. What does this say about Abraham? He was a human being. And so while we talk about Abraham being a great man, one of the greatest men ever to live, we are reminded here that even the greatest among us are sinners. Even the greatest among us need desperately the grace and mercy of God. It's interesting to me what Pharaoh said to Abraham. What have you done to me? Verse 18. It's kind of reminiscent of what the sailors said to Jonah, remember, many centuries later. What have you done? Why are you running from Jehovah? And why are you bringing this terrible storm upon us so that we almost are drowning? What have you done? And it's, again, a reminder that even at this period of time, it has been some time since the flood and since, of course, the world was scattered around. The people of the earth, I should say, are scattered around. Nevertheless, there is still a knowledge of God in the world. And even though Pharaoh was no doubt a pagan, he did recognize God. Did God punish Pharaoh for taking Sarah into his harem? Indeed he did. And Pharaoh recognized this. And Pharaoh submitted. And not only did Pharaoh submit, but Pharaoh sent Abraham away with what? All that he had. And he had already given Abraham camels and provisions. Actually, Abraham was greatly enriched by the time he went to Egypt. And none of that was taken back, even though it was discovered he was in a lie. So it's interesting to me how this actually turned out to be a good thing for Abraham. Any questions or thoughts about Abraham and his lie? Yes, sir?
The providence of God is at work here.
Indeed it is.
And we find this quite a bit in the minor prophets and in the major prophets.
Well, you think about God preserving Sarah. This was God's plan, that Abraham and Sarah would have a son. And as of yet, Abraham and Sarah were not with a child, did not have their own child, but God knew that they would. And so indeed God was preserving her for her husband Abraham. Again, we'll say more about that later when we get to chapter 15.
In relationship to Abraham, he had children that are not recorded in the scripture, right or wrong?
Many of them. And I believe we're going to see reference to that in chapter 14 when we get there. He had a lot of children. And anyway, we're going to say more about Abraham and some of his faults perhaps, and our, we might say, weaknesses. I don't know. I'll say this, because of a decision that he and his wife made, another one, we are still, to the present hour, as a worldwide, are suffering because of Abraham and Sarah and a really bad choice that they made. Yes, Scott?
I'm an example of another time when someone accomplished something that wasn't necessarily how you would think God probably would have envisioned it to begin with. Jacob and Esau, same thing. Stealing the birthright. And the blessing. Well, stealing the blessing. The birthright was freely given, but stealing the blessing from Isaac, from his brother.
He stole it, didn't he?
So, I mean, he would have been blessed anyway. You can only assume, since that was the vision that God had. But, he went and took it instead of allowing God to let it happen. Much like we don't know what would have happened if Abraham would have just been like this. My sister's like, God's behind you. He's already told you what's going to happen in the future. Like, clearly, he's got you covered. But they were afraid to have faith. But you can see, as Abraham starts off so low, as we watch him build into the man he becomes. It's very interesting to see how low he starts and how little faith he has, to where at the end, not to get ahead of your lesson, sorry.
That's okay. Well, chapter 15, God, verse 1, tells Abraham, I'm your shield and exceeding great reward. So Abraham yet hadn't learned that, apparently, not fully, and had not embraced that. So he's trying to come up with a way to protect himself and shield himself without fully trusting in the Lord, as you said.
Just like you're supposed to get up and leave his family and everything, you couldn't fly like go.
It was a process, wasn't it? And so he's growing. And Again, but when we get to chapter, we're looking at some of the negative side of Abraham. But here in chapter 13, we want to see, again, some of the qualities that Abraham had that made him the great man that he was. In chapter 13, verse 1, Abram, went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him, still Lot's traveling with him, to the south. Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold. And he went on his journey from the south as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar which he had made there at first. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. Lot also, who went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. Now the land was not able to support them, that they might dwell together, for their possessions were so great they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdmen of Abram's livestock and the herdmen of Lot's livestock. The Canaanites and the Perizzites then dwelt in the land. So Abram said to Lot, "Please let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdmen and your herdmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, then I will go to the right, or if you go to the right, then I will go to the left." And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt as you go toward Zoar. Then Lot chose for himself all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated from each other. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent even as far as Sodom. But the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. And the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, "Lift your eyes now and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which you see I give to you and your descendants forever. And I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your descendants also could be numbered. Arise, walk in the land through its length and its width, for I give it to you." Then Abram moved his tent and went and dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and built an altar there to the Lord. Okay, before we get into Lot's choice, I want to ask what you observe about Abram that could be of benefit to us. Is there any lesson here for us, just observing the example of Abram?
He allowed his cousin,
Nephew.
to make the choice.
So?
He could have, as the patriarch, taken the choice himself.
He just said, "I'm going to go this way and you go that way."
Right.
And that would have been his right, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
And so he was going to forego his right. What does that remind you of a passage of Scripture anywhere in the New Testament? Sir? That's Philippians 2:3, isn't it? Consider others better than yourself. You think Abram considered Lot to be, in that sense, better than himself? Why would he grant him this choice? Like you said, Brother Davis, he could have simply, told him, "This is what I'm going to do, and you go the other way." He certainly also was very quick to resolve any conflict. And the reason he resolved the conflict is because we're brethren, and there should be no strife between us. And so there should never be strife between brethren. If at all possible, it should be avoided. And sometimes the best way to avoid that strife is to simply give in and let your brother have his way, or your sister have her way. That certainly seemed to be the best method, and certainly that's the method the Lord himself used on more than one occasion. Now, let's consider a few moments the choice of Lot. We have just scant information here, but we can read between the lines. And what was it that Lot did for a living? How did he earn a living? What did he do? He had livestock. So he made a choice based on what? Okay, this is good, well-watered plains, and this green pastures here for my livestock, and they should fare well here, and I should be successful here. And so he made a choice to grow his business. Now, did he have children?
Yeah.
He did. What kind of children did he have?
Daughters.
He had daughters, didn't he? How many? Did he? We know he had at least two, don't we? I don't know, were they married or were they engaged? It's hard to say for sure. But we do know he had 2 daughters.
Well, he had sons-in-law.
He did have sons-in-law.
But we don't know whether they were sons-in-law from the standpoint of being married or whether they were betrothed.
Betrothed, yeah. Could be either way, couldn't it? They could have been sons-in-law, and they could have not been sons-in-law once fire and brimstone rained from heaven. They wouldn't have been sons-in-law anymore, would they? They would have been dead. So that's one way of looking at that particular scenario. But we do. He had 2 daughters. I don't know of any other children, unless someone can correct the narrative for me. But we do know that Abram, or rather Lot, had 2 daughters. He had a wife, and he made a choice to pitch his tent towards Sodom and Gomorrah. And verse 13 says, the men of Sodom and Gomorrah were wicked, exceedingly so, and sinful against the Lord. What was their crime? They were sodomites.
Well, they had many crimes.
They had many crimes, okay?
That was the main one that we see here.
Okay. What one did Jude refer to in the New Testament book of Jude? They went after what?
After men.
They went after strange flesh. I think that's the King James rendering, isn't it? In the book of Jude. They were guilty of fornication, that is sexual impurity. And of course, when you get to chapters 18 and 9, we'll get there in due course. But we do understand that this exceedingly wicked lifestyle was this homosexual lifestyle that they had chosen. And it was of the worst kind. It's the kind of lifestyle that you see sometimes on parade, on St. Patrick's Day parades, gay pride parades. You don't want to watch those parades. If you have children, you certainly do not want children to watch those parades. The behavior is absolutely disgusting to see the lawlessness, absolute lawless behavior of these people. That's not to say that every homosexual behaves this way. But certainly the men of Sodom and Gomorrah were of this stripe and variety. They were lawless people. And what's unfortunate is that Lot makes this choice in spite of this lawless behavior. In spite of this ungodly, immoral environment, he made a choice apparently strictly based on economics. Maybe they had a good Walmart with a good pharmacy in it in that particular section of town, or maybe they had a good Macy's you could go to, or a good mall to go shopping at, or maybe that's where all their friends were, or who knows exactly what all the rationale was. But whatever the reasoning was, they were overlooking the most important thing that should have entered the equation. Will this help me in my service to God, or will this hinder me in my service to God? That was the one choice that Lot made that was not part of the equation. Yes, you had a comment?
Didn't Lot offer the men there in Sodom?
We haven't gotten there yet, but yes, sir, he does do that. It was awful. It was terrible. He offered his daughters, and they didn't want his daughters. You're correct. I don't know what to make of that, but other than that's what it was. Anyway. What did Lot do, or what happened to Lot as a result of this choice?
Lot's son-in-law, later on, 2 nations grew out of going to create havoc for a long time.
It continued to create havoc, didn't it? We hadn't got to chapter 14 yet. We'll get there in a moment. But he was engaged in a war that didn't belong to him, but he was a casualty of war. He was kidnapped as a result of this skirmish, this war. He was oppressed, that is, his righteous soul was vexed from day to day by the ungodly behavior of the Sodomites. He lost everything materially. That which he was hoping to gain and expand upon, he lost utterly when God destroyed those cities. He lost his wife, and he eventually had a shameful, incestuous relationship with both of his daughters. Apparently he learned to drink while he was there, and allowed his daughters to get him drunk so they could have an incestuous relationship with their father and bear children to him. And again, the children of this incestuous relationship became a thorn in the side of the children of Israel for the rest of their sojourn. And so nothing, absolutely nothing good came from this choice. I know that a lot of times people make choices in the Lord's church, like Lot. And they say, we want to have the best for our children. And so we're going to move to this side of town, the north side of town, or the east side of town, or whatever. And we're going to pitch our tent there because that's where all the good shopping malls are, and that's where the good schools are, and that's where all the popular kids are, and that's where the money is, and I can advance in my career there. And all the while not even stopping to consider, though all these things may be true, how will this impact my children spiritually? How will this affect me spiritually? You know, a lot of choices that we make in our lives. We choose the career we're going to serve in and make a living with. We choose who we're going to marry. We choose who our friends are going to be. We have a lot of choices to make in life. And the question is, will we choose wisely? And certainly this choice of Lot reminds us that we must choose wisely. If we fail to choose wisely, what should we do? What did Lot do? Once he lost everything, what did Lot finally do? What did the angels tell him to do? Did he immediately? No, the Lord was long-suffering with him and took him. And eventually he did do as the Lord said. Did his wife do as the Lord required and demanded? She did for a while, but then she looked back and she paid with her life. And so whenever we find ourselves making a bad choice, the best thing to do is follow Lot's example and listen to the Lord and not look back. Any other questions or comments about chapter 13? All right, chapter 14. Yes, ma'am?
What was Lot doing with Abraham anyway when he came on this journey? I know he was his nephew, but why did he choose to take him?
Because his father had died. Apparently the eldest of Terah's children had died. And so Abram apparently took him under his wing, raised him.
That was,
So it might be more like a son kind of thing where he's, sir?
that was something the Jews did. This was
Yes.
something Abraham didn't necessarily choose to do. It was something required of him.
Well, it was something he did. His brother had died and he took Lot and basically raised him.
He's called a righteous man by 2 Peter.
He is a righteous man. Abraham was a righteous man. Not sinless, but righteous. Lot was a righteous man who made a really bad choice. And we could be really good people and make really bad choices and pay dearly for it as well. Chapter 14. And I'm going to do my best to pronounce these names. And if I don't pronounce these names, that's just too bad. Came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, that they made war with Bera, king of Sodom, Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, Shemiber, king of Zeboam, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar. All these joined together in the valley of Siddim, that is the Salt Sea. 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled. In the 14th year, why do I have to say this so many times in the same passage? Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him and attacked the Rephaim in Ashtaroth, Karnaim, and Zuzim in Ham, the Emim in Savi Kirathaim, and the Horites in their mountain of Seir as far as El Paran. I'm not speaking another language, these are just word names, which is by the wilderness. Then they turned back and came to En Misphat, that is Kadesh, and attacked all the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites who dwelt in Hazezon Tamar. And the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboam, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went out and joined together in the valley of Siddim against Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of nations, Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, 4 kings against 5. Now the valley of Siddim was full of asphalt pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. Some fell there, and the remainder fled to the mountains. Then they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions and went their way. They also took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. Then one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and brother of Aner, and they were allies with Abram. Now when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his 318 trained servants who were born in his own house, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. I believe this perhaps would include some of his children. We'll see that reference later in our reading. He divided his forces against them by night, and he and his servants attacked them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. So he brought back all the goods, and also brought back his brother Lot and his goods, as well as the women and the people. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shavi, that is the king's valley, after his return from the defeat of Shedor Laomor and the kings who were with him. Now all of that, in my humble opinion, was related to us so we could read what we're about to read. And what I suppose we could surmise here is that this episode in the life of Abraham reminds us that a lot of things undoubtedly occurred in the lifetime of this great patriarch that we know nothing about. But this is one of those events in his life that is significant for this reason. Beginning at verse 18, Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And he gave him a tithe of all. Now the king of Sodom said to Abram, Give me the persons and take the goods for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have raised my hand to the Lord, God Most High, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will take nothing from a thread to a sandal strap, and that I will not take anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich, except only what the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men who went with me, Anar, Eshcol, and Mamre, let them take their portion. All right. Now that we've read about this war, and Abraham being a military man, as well as a great patriarch and liar, he was a lot of things. It is fascinating he was able to assemble an army and was victorious here. And of course, God was with him. We'll see that again in next chapter 15. But let's talk about Melchizedek for a moment. One thing I want to mention for the benefit of everyone in the class is that there are two items that are brought with the king of Salem: bread and wine. Now, I want to focus for a moment on the word wine here. The word wine in the Old Testament is from the Hebrew word yayin, and the word wine in the New Testament is from the Greek word oinos. And in both cases, both the Old and the New Testament, the word wine is a generic term. In other words, wine can represent the fruit of the vine in any form. In the book of Isaiah, for example, Isaiah speaks of wine that's still in the grape, hanging on the cluster, still on the vine. It's not an intoxicating beverage. It's the fruit that's still hanging on the vine. And he refers to it as wine, yayin. This is the Hebrew term. It is confusing to us in the English language because we use the word wine and what we think is Ernest and Julio Gallo. We think some processed liquor that's sold in stores that people drink and become intoxicated with. And so Jesus turned water to wine, and therefore a lot of people conclude, well, Jesus was a wine person and we should be wine people, nothing wrong with a little wine. And so we're confused. I just wanted to simply observe that wine in the Bible, both Old and New Testament, sometimes refers to an intoxicating beverage. Sometimes it refers to that which is not intoxicating. It really depends on the context, and we just need to be aware of this. It's interesting to me, and I don't know what to make of it, honestly. But the king of Salem, who was an extremely significant individual, this whole period we just read here is extremely significant. He brings out bread and fruit of the vine. Why? Was Abraham hungry? Were his men hungry? Well, if they were, there was plenty of provisions from this skirmish that they could have eaten. He didn't bring out bread and wine to refresh them because they needed it. Now, you may ask, why bread and wine? I don't know. I do know that the early Christian writers, 2nd and 3rd century writers, all pretty much concluded this was somehow symbolic of the Lord's Supper, and that this king of Salem is bringing out bread and fruit of the vine. I don't know what to make of that. I don't know how much to make of that. I do know that was pretty much the consensus for a considerable period of time. Still, many, Burton Kaufman, for example, holds that view. Others, I'm sure, hold that view. I don't know what it means other than he brought out bread and wine. And he presented it to Abraham. And he blessed Abraham.
Well, he was a priest.
He was a priest.
Was a king, was a priest, yeah.
He was a king, and he was a priest. He was king of Salem. And we're going to read in a moment what that means. And he was priest of the Most High God. Now, was he a Jew?
Nope.
He was not, was he? And so Abraham was not alone in monotheism. He was not the only human being alive on planet Earth at this time that believed in the one true and living God. He was not the only worshiper of the one true and living God. And furthermore, when Melchizedek met Abraham, we're not told if they had ever met before this, but somehow, in some way, Abraham recognized that this man is not any pagan priest from some pagan city, which was very prominent at this time. But he is priest of the Most High God. How did he recognize him as such? Was it something he said? Perhaps there was some exchange that is not recorded. I don't know. But he did recognize him as a priest of the Most High God. Yes.
He had neither beginning of days nor ending of days.
How do you know?
That's what the Bible says
Where?
in the New Testament.
That's Hebrews chapter 7, by the way. If you want to be turning there, we'll turn there and look at it in just a moment. I will say this, that just observing, Melchizedek meets him, and Melchizedek blessed Abraham, conferred a blessing upon Abraham. And Abraham gave a tithe to Melchizedek. Gave a tenth to Melchizedek. So what does that say about Melchizedek? He's in a superior position to Abraham. Now, what did I say in the very beginning of class? Perhaps one of the greatest men ever to live. And who did I say that was? And yet Melchizedek, what do you know about Melchizedek?
King of Salem.
Priest of the Most High God, got you, see? And he brought out bread and wine and blessed Abraham. That's what you know about him, isn't it? Where'd he come from? Where'd he go?
Well, I wouldn't say that's why that statement of Hebrews 7 they had neither beginning of days or end of life.
110th Psalm, verse 4, tells us that, the 110th Psalm, that God said, I have sworn and will not relent, that he will be a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Yes, sir, you have a comment?
Doesn't it say no beginning and no end?
It does. Let's, y'all keep referring to that. Let's just read it. In the New Testament book of Hebrews, chapter 7, Melchizedek is a prominent character in the book of Hebrews. The last verse of chapter 6, the forerunner has entered for us, even Jesus, having become high priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. And what he means by that is that Jesus is a priest after the order of Melchizedek, as opposed to after the order of Levi. He's not of the Levitical tribe. He's not a descendant of Levi. And so he's not a priest of the Levitical order. He's a priest after the order of Melchizedek. Question, what does that mean? Answer, chapter 7, verse 1.
Also,
For-
it means that Christ is a priest for everybody, not just the Jews.
That's right, we're about to read that. Chapter 7. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom also Abraham gave a tenth part of all, being first translated king of righteousness, and then also king of Salem, meaning king of peace, without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, remains a priest continually. Now, consider how great this man was, to whom even the patriarch Abraham gave a tenth of the spoils. And indeed, those who are the sons of Levi, who receive the priesthood, have a commandment to receive tithes from the people according to the law, that is, from their brethren, though they have come from the loins of Abraham. But he whose genealogy is not derived from them received tithes from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises. Now, beyond all contradiction, the lesser is blessed by the better. Here, mortal men receive tithes, but there he receives them of whom it is witness that he lives. Before we run past this verse, I want to read verse 8 again, and I want you to tell me who he's referring to. Here, mortal men receive tithes. That would be the priests of the Levitical order who were still receiving tithes the time of the writing of the book of Hebrews. But there he receives them, of whom it is witnessed that he lives. Who's he? Is it Melchizedek? Verse 25 of this same chapter, therefore he is also able to save to the uttermost those who come to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. So, who always lives?
Christ eventually, but Melchizedek first.
Okay. Is Melchizedek still alive?
No.
He's in heaven.
He's in heaven, okay. We assume, yeah. Yeah, he'd have to be,
There's
wouldn't
no
he?
genealogy in that, in the Jewish mind, because there's no recorded genealogy in the beginning of days or end of life. They're not recorded. But obviously he was born, and obviously he died. But
Would
there's
he
no
be in
record.
heaven or paradise?
What's that?
Would Melchizedek be in heaven or paradise?
He'd be with the Lord. Verse 9, even Levi, who received tithes, paid tithes through Abraham, so to speak, for he was still in the loins of his father when Melchizedek met him. Of course, there's more said about, we've said enough here from chapter 7 to establish several things. Having neither beginning of days nor end of years is a reference to the genealogical table that was non-existent regarding Melchizedek. We don't know who his parents were. We don't know when he died, where he was buried. In fact, when you're reading the narrative in Genesis, and we're reading about this war, this conflict, and just, there's this guy. And he just appears. And he blesses Abraham, and Abraham gives him a tenth, and then he's gone. And so, God has chosen to use this man as an example, as a shadowy reflection, pointing us to something. And so when Jesus appeared, where did he come from? Well, I know you're going to say heaven, but I'm just saying, where did he come from? What was the beginning of his days?
He had no beginning of days.
Jesus has no beginning. Well, the Son of God has no beginning of days. And what are his end of years? He has no end of years, does he? Of course, as Jesus, the man, he was born and he did die. But as his true self, he's always been. I am that I am. And so he's always existed from all eternity. And so from everlasting to everlasting, he is God. And so Melchizedek, in that sense, represents strikingly who Jesus is to us and brings out this pre-incarnate reality that we are dealing with God who becomes flesh and dwells among us. And yes, he did institute a ceremony that we observe every Lord's Day that involves bread and wine, or fruit of the vine, to be more exact. But nevertheless, we still observe this memorial feast. Now, whether this is what the bread and wine means or signifies, I don't know. I just find it interesting that these are the two emblems that Melchizedek brought with him. And again, we have to look at the context. Abraham wasn't hungry. He had plenty. In fact, he gives a tenth of all of his spoils to Melchizedek. So it wasn't like he was needy. He wasn't going to the food bank. He was blessed with this symbolic gesture of bread and wine. Yes, Scott?
It's also interesting you say these two symbols. And yes, but not only that, like you just said, he also fulfills another commandment that we have today, and that is to give as you have been prospered. He just prospered from this war and took all the spoils back that the enemy army had captured from everybody. He just prospered all of that, and he gives a tenth of it to Melchizedek, along with partaking of the bread and cup.
So separate and apart from the bread and wine, he gives a tithe. That's all right. That's a Church of Christ expression, by the way. It's a Church of Christism, and we separate and apart from the Lord's Supper. Yeah, I know. I don't care. I'm in trouble all the time. Yes.
I always had a question in regard to what he gave to Abraham. Perhaps this was something that he gave to all who came his way.
I don't know. Was it? Could have been.
I don't know.
I wanted to ask another question. Why did Abraham give a tenth? And why did those under the law of Moses give a tenth? And why do we not give a tenth? Why do we not give at least a tenth? Wouldn't that be a better way of asking that? I don't know. I'm troubled. The more you study, the more you learn, the more you understand. From the very beginning of time, God has always expected we give our best. And under the patriarchal period, they gave a tenth. Under the law of Moses, they gave a tenth. Under the Christian age, we said, we're emancipated. We don't have to give a tenth. Give as we purpose in our own heart. Well, that may be. But what are we purposing in our heart? I guess perhaps that's why the Lord left it that way, because it really is more a test of our true love, isn't it, than an actual requirement. Yes, sir?
Was not Enoch, everybody pronounce his name, was he basically on the same level as Melchizedek? Because he said, and
he was not. Well, we know where he went. God took him. Wherever God took him to, I don't know, was that paradise or heaven? But God took him. So wherever that was, he just wasn't anymore. But Melchizedek, according to the narrative, there's no record of him being taken by God or dying, or he just was there and then he's gone. Nothing else said about him. He just appears and then disappears. Quickly as he came on the scene, he went off the scene. And so it is as if he had no beginning of days or end of years, just like he just always is. And that's what the truth is about Jesus. He just always is. And that's what the Hebrew writer wants us to understand. Any other thoughts or comments?
one more.
Yes, sir?
You talked about wine a while ago.
Uh-huh.
Proverbs 20, verse 1 says, wine is a mocker.
It does, yes, sir.
That refers to the fermented wine.
It is, yes. That's correct. Strong drink is raging, and whoever is deceived by it is not wise. That's 834, please, in your psalm books. Ladies, don't forget you are invited to enjoy dinner together at Ruby Tuesdays in Carrollton tomorrow night at 6:30. Ladies' Night Out in Carrollton tomorrow night, Ruby Tuesday at 6:30. Also, don't forget we need volunteers for next year. If you can help with baking communion bread or preparing communion in 2017, please sign the list on the table in the foyer. Also, if you can help with building security in 2017, please sign the list on the table in the foyer. Area-wide Youth Devotional will be hosted by Rockmart this Sunday, December the 11th, starting at 5 o'clock. Also, there will be a fellowship meal here on December the 18th, following our morning worship. Deanna, that's Sunday week. So not this Sunday, but no, that's not right. Is that right? That is right. Because next Wednesday is the 15th, my sister's birthday. Where's Lisa? What's that? Oh, she's out there? Yeah, it'll be her birthday next Wednesday. So then, yeah, the 18th. Yeah, Sunday week. Any other announcements we need to make? Oh, my sister Lynn is at home sick tonight. I'm sorry to hear that. Anyone else we need to mention on our prayer list tonight? Sir? Uh-huh.
I believe we haven't gotten more news, have we? Okay, so she's gonna go check on chemo and radiation for her lung cancer, but they biopsied Monday. They biopsied her spot Monday, and they will see about chemo and radiation. Which is unfortunate. They're hoping to be able to just remove the surgery and be done with it. That appears not to be the case. So especially
It's unfortunate.
these awful treatments,
You know,
if you would keep.
absolutely keep her in our prayers. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Lord.
More?
Lord, thank you, Lord.
Yes, Roger.
Fran's brother, Robbie Young,
Uh-huh.
had a reoccurrence of cancer.
Mm.
Wanted to keep him in our prayers.
Robin, you said?
Uh,
Robbie?
Young.
I'm sorry. Sorry to hear that. Your song invitation again? 834 in our songbooks. We were looking at Abraham again tonight in our class and pointing out that Abraham was a great man, perhaps not the greatest, but he was a great man, certainly of the great men that have ever lived. And yet, in spite of his greatness and his faith, Abraham was, as we said in class, a man, meaning he did sin. Now, Paul reminds us of this in the book of Romans when he says, "For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God." Sin is a common problem, and it affects, or should I say, infects every one of us to one degree or the other. Sometimes sin can overwhelm us and can actually break us spiritually, and some wander from the faith. That is an unfortunate reality. And certainly we need to do everything we can to restore those among us who have wandered and strayed from the faith because they have been so overwhelmed by sin, either in their own lives or perhaps discouraged from sin in the lives of others. Sin is a deadly disease. But I believe as I look around this room tonight, there are many of us here tonight who, we might say, are the cream of the crop, the best of the best. But even among us, we struggle with sin, we struggle with temptation, and we often fail. And it may be that some are present here tonight that need the prayers of the church, that need to be restored, and need to make public confession. Or perhaps some need to obey the gospel for the first time tonight. Certainly, we pray that you will make good the offer of salvation that is in Christ, and that you will walk in the footsteps of Abraham, being obedient through your faith. If we can assist you in any way, please make that need known while together we stand and as we sing.
Would you be free from